Hello there. Didn't see you there. I was just reading one of my favorite books, Good Kings and Queens. It's a history book. And something I've noticed about a lot of these history books is that they tend to focus on kings and queens throughout history, specifically the medieval ages, as well as the actions of their knights and lords, and many times peasantry. And there exists dozens and dozens of movies and TV shows that tend to focus on the sort of glorifying actions of these knights and peasants. However, besides that, history books, movies, and TV shows always overlook a certain aspect of medieval age that was very prevalent in the shaping of it, as well as shaping of the culture that we have today. This, of course, being the medieval musicians, troubadours, junglers, bards, and, more notably, medieval minstrels. Come on, follow me. As I mentioned before, the medieval minstrels were a very important aspect of medieval society. Many times they were members of a lower class, and they would travel all across the country from court to court, trying to seek out positions within these courts and impress their kings and lords.
Yes, they were musicians who travelled, but it was on a very formal basis, and it was usually from court to court. And as a minstrel, your main preoccupation was to get yourself a good job and get yourself some livery, some clothing that associated yourself with the city or with a court. There are tales of kings who would want to listen to music all day long, and they would have their musicians play from the entire time.
The future is bright, our children will marry, our kingdoms unite. Scumps, scumps, scumps.
The role of music was to provide that sort of ceremonial splendour in an oral sense, like a sonic soundscape, if you like, for a medieval town or a court, where you'd have your band of trumpeters, you'd have musicians who played quieter instruments to be able to play it in more intimate circumstances. In the Middle Ages, and again right up until say about 1640, 1650, there were hierarchies of instruments. And within those hierarchies, there were divisions between them. We didn't have orchestras in the sense that we have a mixture of wind, brass, strings and percussion nowadays. And certainly ensembles were never that big. In the Middle Ages, a court band could consist of 4 or 5 players of one type of instrument and 4 or 5 of another. And the division, as I mentioned, comes where you have the loud instruments, trumpets, shawms, which are the loud double reed instruments, percussion, and martial trumpets, all set off in one area. And they would have their own repertoire, their own skills, their own training, and they would play for specific functions.
Beat the drums and blow the trumpets! Join the bombs and beats and trumpets streaming in from Chartres to Calais.
And then on the other hand, you had the players of the softer, the quieter instruments, flutes, recorders. In the early Middle Ages, an instrument called the vielle, which was a bowed instrument, the lute, obviously, and the harp as well, which were the principal instruments, along with the small organetto, which was a small sort of laptop organ that people would play. And they again would have specific functions and roles within courtly music, as would the louder instruments, largely playing for dance music in large gatherings and for ceremonial music.
Minstrels and other forms of medieval musicians often employed the help of an ensemble where together they would all perform for the Lord at feasts and festivals.
Researches into how musicians worked in the Middle Ages and beyond, and even before that, when they were ensembles, that was what it was about. You were trained to work with others. It wasn't a virtuoso conservatoire training until we get into the 18th, 19th centuries, where the idea of a virtuoso performer is born as a general concept.
Besides being court musicians, the medieval minstrels had many other talents that they actually utilized in tasks that they were assigned.
We would call a musician now as the trumpeter who would sound the signals on a battlefield in medieval warfare right through until the 19th, early 20th century. And those trumpet signals were martial signals. They were like Morse code, they were like flag symbols. They were there to tell people what to do, where to go, and when to do it. a lot of what happened on the battlefield was a result of what the trumpeter did and how the information that he gave over.
Jongleurs is the original kind of minstrel slash jester. Yeah. They were a Saxon invention, so jongleurs would go around the country and they would sing songs which weren't always perceived as particularly well by the monarchy or the ruling classes at the time. There was a lot of these jongleurs around the time of William the Conqueror would sing songs about the sort of Saxon heroes that they'd conquered and were going around, like Hereward the Wake. He was going around allegedly nailing heads of Normans to doorposts, and they would sing songs about this, to which William the Conqueror was not overly happy about. But there's not a lot he can do about it, because somebody writes a song, somebody sings a song, and that translates, and other people learn these songs and other people start singing them, and it's almost the perfect form of propaganda, because it just keeps rolling over. And I think that's the interesting thing about these characters, is they can do all of these things that maybe a lord or a knight or a politician can't say, but they can say them.
Was that musicians have ears as well as fingers, and whilst they're playing they can hear conversations that were going on, and it's no surprise that musicians often found themselves in a sort of secondary employment in the field of espionage.
There is one instance where a minstrel had actually gone above the call of duty, if you can say that, approximately 1,000 years ago at the Battle of Hastings. This, of course, being the tale of Taillefer. Taillefer was the name of William's jester, then the Duke of Normandy. William led his soldiers throughout southeastern Britain, but was stopped by King Harold. The Norman troops said to be unnerved before the fight, as they were on lower ground and faced far more troops. However, Taillefer rode out in front of them, and as everyone watched on with a growing confusion, Taillefer performed the Song of Roland, a song highly popular within the medieval era for minstrels to sing. Taillefer then jungled his sword and charged for the enemy, killing one, but then suiciding into enemy's line. This strange but courageous action was said to have rallied William's forces and inspire morale enough for them to claim victory and eventually the throne for William. However, minstrels and other medieval musicians were employees of the Lord, employed to make music, while their other actions were often auxiliary.
Of heroism by individuals. That wasn't the role of a minstrel, and if it did happen, it happened as a byproduct of where they were. I mean, we hear about Richard I and his incarceration when he was captured and held for ransom, coming back from the Crusades, about his minstrel Blondel entertaining him. Well, the minstrel may well have been there as part of a larger retinue, because as part of a retinue you would be you would be expected to fight if someone attacked you. To say it was a job doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I think for us as musicians, the idea of creating some sort of art, it seems to be fundamental for your training, whereas for them to be a really good player was your training. If you've got that status, you've got that courtly status with your wearing the livery and having all the trappings of being associated with the court, that was a pretty damn good job to get. And you're well paid, you got your clothes bought for you, probably got given some land to retire to when you finished working, finished being able to play anymore. It was a job, and the whole reason that we find in medieval manuscripts that deal with music, treatises that are on music, they never talk about music as a practical subject. That isn't what it's about. Music was one of the quadrivium, it was one of the sciences of medieval education. It wasn't examined for its social context, it was examined for its spiritual and scientific and mathematical context. It was all about the harmony of the spheres and the vibrations of the constellations being represented by God through man and all of that sort of thing. That's on the theoretical side of it. The practical side we can't say a great deal about in terms of music, because there's very little surviving evidence of what they actually played.
Unfortunately, most of the music that had been performed by medieval minstrels has been lost to history due to them actually not recording anything, transcribing or writing down anything that they performed. However, in contrary, the church had actually recorded everything that they had performed, and so this is the medieval music that we have today.
Church was one aspect of musical life, and the reason we know about the church is because the church, for various reasons, decided that one of the best ways to transmit the various chants of the Mass and those propers of the Mass and the extra, the sort of clausula that are attached to Mass composition, was to write them down, was to find a way of recording pitch and duration on a piece of paper so you could take it somewhere else. It wasn't someone saying, you know, this is such a great tune, I just have to write it down. Which music seems to be so prominent is because so much of it's written down. What isn't written down are those everyday songs and tunes that people would sing and dance to, and we don't have them anymore. So there's an imbalance in terms of surviving evidence.
Following the end of the medieval era, the minstrels and other musicians were kept alive, but only through Shakespearean plays where they are perceived as the fool. And as you can tell, that is a stereotype that still perseveres today.
But I not a hard heart, for truly I love none.
A dear happiness to women. They would have been troubled with a pernicious suitor. I thank God and my cold blood I am of your humour for that. I had rather hear my dog bark at a crow than a man swear he loves me.
God keep your ladyship still in that mind, so some gentleman or other shall escape a predestinate scratch fate.
Oh, scratching could not make it worse, and 'twere such a face as yours were.
Well, you are a rare parrot teacher.
A bird at my tongue is better than a beast of yours.
And in the 16th century, in Shakespeare's time, you start to find the term minstrel being used as a derogative term. And it was the term musician that was a much more classy nomenclature that you would apply to that's to somebody who's trained as a musician, who's got a professional status. And that's why they had guilds, starting in Paris in the Middle Ages and going to other countries. And you always had confraternities, the idea being that minstrels, such as jugglers and dancers and guys who busked on street corners, were kept in their place. And if they came into a town without a license, they were out straight away, and usually thrown out and kept out. Whereas the liveried professional musicians, the ones who'd gone through a training, were the ones who had the job security of being able to sort of control the job market, as it were.
The minstrel is a figure that may seem archaic within the modern context, but minstrels and the legacy of minstrels are ever present within our world today. The instruments the musicians of medieval era played have been adapted into some of the most recognized instruments in all genres, from orchestral to rock. The minstrel's musical relationship towards their lord is one seen in every record contract, and the medieval minstrel's unwavering devotion towards their craft is reprised by many musicians, especially those trying to make a name for themselves on the streets of London or anywhere in the world. Music is one of the most important hallmarks of culture, and the minstrels, along with the other fashions of medieval musicians, have greatly contributed to that culture, not just for England, but for the world.
Since summer first was leafy, then sigh not so, but let them go, and be you blithe and bonny, converting more sounds of woe into hay.